The courtroom buzzed with the tension of eyes avoiding one another. Cameras were in place, folders stacked like fortresses on the defense table, and the judge, eyes lowered, rehearsed a neutrality that trembled. In a corner of the room, a man in a gray uniform quietly swept away the traces of dust, as if cleaning something far greater than the floor. No one noticed when he stopped sweeping. The broom stood still, and a heavy silence fell as that hand, worn by time and labor, slowly rose, as if reaching for something long denied. For a moment, no one knew what to do. But the judge, curious or perhaps unsettled, nodded subtly. The man walked to the center of the room with slow steps, pulling a worn cardboard box from his janitor cart. When he set it on the evidence table, the dry thud echoed louder than any verdict ever spoken there. "I kept this," he said, "because I knew the truth would want out one day." What followed was so devastating, the judge dropped his pen, took off his robe, and left the room without looking back. For 22 winters, Hank pushed his cleaning cart through the same marble hallways under fluorescent lights that never seemed to go out. No one knew his last name, whether he had kids, if he owned a home, or took 3 buses. But there, among trash cans and institutional dust, he was a constant presence, like the discreet cracks in the courthouse walls. He arrived before sunrise, left when the first interns were still yawning. He swept up whispered confessions, scrubbed ambition off bathroom floors, and picked up forgotten reports beside plastic cups. No one looked at him in elevators, and that taught him to see what others missed. The latest case filling the courthouse was different. The defendant was one of the wealthiest men in the state, accused of multi-million-dollar tax fraud, money laundering, and destruction of evidence. Stakes were high, but the atmosphere was one of predictability. Everyone seemed to know he'd walk free. The assigned judge had a reputation for strictness, but rumors swirled of questionable decisions in past cases. The prosecution seemed outmatched, while the defense paraded around with leather briefcases and rehearsed bravado. Hank just kept cleaning, storing faces, conversations, and the crumbs of truth that fell to the ground. One night, while cleaning a decommissioned archive room, he heard muffled shouting and the hurried rustling of documents. Curious, he peeked through a cracked door and saw men loading papers labeled "confidential" into boxes bound for incineration. That moment clung to his memory like dust on a damp rag, and never let go. The trial moved forward like a well-rehearsed play. The prosecution presented vague charts, hesitant witnesses, and incomplete spreadsheets. The defense, meanwhile, seemed to control time and tone. The whole thing reeked of a bought outcome. The defendant smiled subtly, arms folded confidently, casting smug glances toward the gallery. His lawyers mocked every attempt by the prosecution as if it were a bad joke. The judge watched with a neutral face, but his pen shook in his hand. Meanwhile, Hank mopped the anteroom floor, observing everything through the reflection on the glass door. He recognized the same faces from when he used to clean the defendant's corporate offices. It was like watching an old nightmare come back to life. Years ago, Hank had been called in to clean after an internal accident. A worker had knocked over a shelf full of documents, and the orders were clear. None of it was to survive. But something in Hank resisted the silent command to destroy and forget. He set aside a box full of papers, numbers, stamps, even printed emails. He hid it behind disinfectant bottles in the back of his supply closet where it sat, forgotten and untouched. For years, Hank avoided opening the box, as if doing so would make him an accomplice or a snitch. Now, sitting in the locker room after a shift, he opened the lid for the first time in over a decade. The same yellowed, brittle papers were still there, and their contents felt heavier than ever. Holding them felt like holding a secret capable of collapsing entire walls. The next morning, watching the prosecutor mocked for lacking evidence, something inside Hank broke. It wasn't anger. It was an old shame, growing like mold. For the first time, he thought, What if no one else is waiting for the truth but me? That humid afternoon, the courtroom felt like an echo chamber of empty words. Journalists yawned. The judge checked his watch, and the defendant wore the same air of invincibility. It was in that stagnant moment that an unexpected hand rose in the back of the room. At first, no one understood. A janitor didn't speak, especially not in the middle of a high-profile trial. But Hank didn't back down, and his eyes carried a weariness that needed no explanation. The judge hesitated, then gave a brief nod. Hank walked slowly to the front, carrying the worn cardboard box in his arms. The sound of his footsteps echoed louder than the arguments he'd overheard over the years. He set the box on the evidence table, opening it with care, like revealing something long buried. Inside were original documents, memos, destruction orders with physical and digital signatures, a complete timeline of the crime. The prosecutor flipped through the pages with trembling fingers. Among the papers were detailed emails, foreign payment records, illegal meeting logs, and lists of beneficiaries. One name stood out, the judge's own. A grave silence fell. The judge picked up the documents, read 2 pages, and dropped his pen. He removed his robe like a warrior discarding a defeated armor and left the courtroom without a word, not from cowardice, but from irreparable shame. The session was suspended. The businessman was taken away in cuffs, and the court system plunged into internal reviews. But Hank declined every interview, saying only, "I didn't keep it for revenge. I just thought maybe the mess could still be cleaned." Hank returned to his routine as if nothing had happened. He cleaned the same hallways, swept the same rooms, but now eyes followed him in silence. No one quite knew how to treat him, hero or traitor, so they simply left him alone. He turned down lecture offers, new job proposals, even a civic award from City Hall. He said he never wanted a spotlight, just didn't want that box buried with him. "I didn't do it for you," he once said. "I did it because I couldn't sleep anymore." One gray Saturday, he walked to the courthouse memorial, where judges' and prosecutors' names were engraved in marble. He cleaned the plaque gently, like restoring dignity to something stained. Before leaving, he tucked a folded note among the dried flowers. The note read in shaky handwriting, "Truth doesn't need a robe. Just someone unafraid to clean what others try to hide. No signature, no explanation. But everyone knew where that steady hand came from." Years passed, and the courthouse halls continued to gather dust. Hank remained, quiet as ever, cleaning slowly what others left behind. And though few knew his full name, people began to notice the weight of things they used to overlook. In a world where so many truths are swept under the rug, stories like Hank's remind us that courage can live in silence. If this journey moved you, there are many more waiting to be discovered. Subscribe to the channel to follow stories of unseen strength, forgotten dignity, and quiet turning points. In the next video, you'll meet another ordinary soul who, without making noise, changed everything around them.